guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing my wrap up for January and February. So these are all the books that I read in 2 months, and I'm just going to kind of go over them, let you guys know what I thought of them, my review, all that kind of stuff. I don't feel like this video needs a really long intro, so we're just going to jump right into it. These books are not going to be in order because I'm just picking them up from the stack, but I don't really think that matters. So the first book that I read this year was Serpent and Dub. You guys know this. I have a video on it on my channel. If you guys want to know my full thoughts, very in-depth thoughts on this book, you can go watch my review, and it basically goes into all of my thoughts on it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And my rating for this was 4 stars. I actually liked this book. I thought it was really entertaining. It's definitely a romance fantasy, so that is kind of what you're getting with this novel. If you don't like romance fantasies or you don't like a strong romance in your fantasies, I would probably say this won't be your thing, because that's definitely, I think, the main genre. It's basically about a witch and a witch hunter who are forced to marry, basically. So it's a very strong hate to love. Like I said, I have a whole video on it to let you guys know what I thought about it. There were things that I didn't love, but there were also things that I did love. But overall, I gave this book 4 stars because I thought it was really fun to read. I loved a lot of the magic elements to it. I loved a lot of the characters and the character relationships and the character growth. That was a really big one for me. And I'm excited to read the second book because I do believe this is going to be a duology. And the second book just had a cover reveal, and it is stunning. It is one of the most beautiful covers I've ever seen, and I'm so excited to read it because I think that the character growth in that novel is going to be even better, and I cannot wait to see where the characters go in that novel. I feel like this is a pretty polarizing book. Some people love it, some people don't, but I'm one of those people that's more on the like it side than the dislike it side. If you love romance and you love fantasy and you like those two things together, I would say go for it. But if you're really picky about romances, I would definitely say skip out on that one because I have a feeling you probably won't like it. So the next book that I picked up was a historical romance, and I was actually walking through my local bookstore and I came across this book and I loved the cover, and that's what, you know, made me pick it up and read the back. And to be honest, when I saw this cover, I thought it was an adult romance, and that's kind of why I decided to pick it up. It just looked more adult romancy to me, and I made the assumption that it was adult, but once I got it home and started reading it, I realized it's actually young adult. So it is Wait for Me by Caroline Leach. So this is about a girl. It's set in 1945, and it's in kind of the time of World War II, and this girl lives on a farm with her dad and 2 brothers. Her brothers get sent off to war, so now it's just her and her dad, and they need help on the farm. So one day, this war prisoner gets dropped off, and he's going to be the farmhand, and he is a German war prisoner, and so she instantly believes that he is an enemy, and she has so much hate for him, and she doesn't like him, and she's super standoffish. And what ends up happening is she starts to get to know him a little bit more, and they start, you know, talking and getting to know each other, and she starts to realize that he's a really nice guy, and she has a lot of inner turmoil over this. And it's a book kind of about coming to terms with your own feelings. I liked this book. So actually I had to change my rating on this book because this is one of those rare books that you read and you like it while you're reading it, but then after you put it down and when you're done reading it and, you know, it's been a few weeks since you've read it, you realize how much you're still thinking about it and how much the story stuck with you, and you kind of keep catching yourself kind of going back to that book in memory, just thinking about it. And that happened with me with this book. So when I first rated this, I gave it 3 stars. It was really good, but I had to move it up to 4 stars because I found myself pondering and thinking about this book so much weeks after I read it, and I realized how much I liked the characters, how immersive this book was. For some reason with this book, it was so vivid in my mind. I could really picture, you know, the setting and the characters, and there's just certain books that do that. I remember Daughter of the Burning City. It's another book that was so immersive for me. I could just visually picture everything in my mind, and so it made me be able to reflect back on the book at later dates really, really easily, and that's the same thing that happened with this book. And it's funny because I wouldn't have said this while I was reading it, but now after I've read it and it's been a couple of weeks, I kind of see myself going back to reread this, which is interesting to me. So that's kind of my thoughts on this. Just kind of a weird thing that happened. There were aspects of this book that kind of felt a little slow at times. It's definitely like a coming of age, very sweet romance. It has very endearing qualities to it, almost a little naive. I would recommend this if you're looking for a sweet romance. Is it the best romance I've ever read in my whole entire life? No, I definitely wouldn't say that, but it was definitely cute and sweet. So the thing is, I kind of wish to a certain degree that this was an adult novel, and I think I would have had a stronger connection and a stronger love for this romance if it was adult. And I feel like this is a theme for me. I don't know what it is, but I feel like with adult romances, I feel a stronger connection with the characters and I see a connection between them more. And a lot of times it's because of the things that they can put in adult novels. And so it always makes me feel stronger for the couple. And I feel like if this novel was adult, I think I would have liked it a little bit more. I think I would have felt stronger for this couple. And that's kind of one downside I find with young adult romances, but that's just me. Sometimes I feel like young adult romances are missing something, if you know what I'm saying. But this was just still really cute, really endearing, and I really enjoyed it. So the next book I read was She Rides Shotgun by Jordan Harper, and this book was in my top 10 books I want to read in 2020, and I was so excited to get to this because it's been sitting on my shelf for like 2 years or something, and it's been a book I've kept wanting to get to, but I just kept putting it off and putting it off. So once I put it in my top 20 books, or sorry, top 10 books, I was like excited all of a sudden. So I picked it up, and this was really good. So my first reaction to this book when I finished it was, that needs to be a movie. It just felt like it would make such a good movie to me. And the best way to describe this book is it's the perfect mix of the movie Logan with, you know, Wolverine and that little girl, mixed with like Bonnie and Clyde. If you put those two ideas together in a book, you got this book. I loved that. So I've talked about how I really like father-daughter relationships in books, and this has a very strong father-daughter relationship, but it's not the most like functional like relationship or the most healthy relationship, because a lot of this book is about a dad teaching his young daughter how to be a emotionless criminal. But it was so cool because it made for a very interesting dynamic, and it was oddly realistic while being also just kind of like not at the same time. So basically this is about a guy who went to prison, and the huge gang that is in his prison basically put a bounty over his head when he got out, and that gang wanted him dead. And they also wanted his daughter dead. And so in that, he had to kidnap his daughter and basically teach her the ropes of the criminal life and teach her how to protect herself. And he had to take her along with him while he did everything that he had to do to get this bounty that was over his head gone. And it was just really good. I really enjoyed it. The only downside to this book that I found is that the language and the writing style was very different to anything I've read before. It definitely had a slang street style vibe to it at times, to where I had to read certain parts over again or slower because I didn't catch what he was trying to say at first. And so at times it was a little bit hard to read, but it was fine. It was still really good. If you're looking for a more darker, hard-hitting type of novel, I would highly recommend it, and I really think that it should be made into a movie. So the next book that I read was this short little book called I Cant Read, and this is by William Manzanares. So the author of this book actually gave me this book for free to review and to read, and so that is what I did. It's very short, as you can tell, but this is basically this man's journey, his story about his dyslexia diagnosis and kind of how he overcame that and became a very successful businessman. And it's kind of like an anecdotal self-help style memoir. It's written to inspire you. And if you guys didn't know, my daughter Elena is dyslexic, and so reading this, it definitely put a lot of hope in me, seeing how this man, you know, struggled so hard with reading and in school, and how he was never diagnosed because when he was young, you know, it just wasn't something that was talked about as much. So he just spent his entire life through school, you know, finding ways to cope with his struggles and his learning disability. And then it kind of talks about how those ways that he found to cope actually came in handy when he grew up and he started running his own businesses and things like that. It's a story on how he learned to read, how he, you know, started listening to audiobooks, and all sorts of really interesting things. Now, one thing that I can say about this book is I do feel like part of his successes in life and part of his, you know, ability to be a successful entrepreneur is his personality and not just his dyslexia or anything like that. I don't think that he necessarily touches on that a lot. I think that he romanticizes disabilities a little bit in this novel, kind of calling them like a superpower and things like that. And I don't usually like that wording when it comes to like hardships or struggle. But I think that this book is going to be a really good book for Elena to read, whether she reads it physically or listens to the audiobook. I liked it. I gave it 3 stars. But overall, I thought it was really good and a good tool for dyslexics or people who have a learning disability in general. So the next 2 books I picked up were the monstrous graphic novels. So I picked these up, well, I didn't pick these up. I asked my husband for this entire series for Christmas. I had heard such good things about the monstrous graphic novels, and I was like, just get me all 4 so I can like binge read them, right? And these books are not easy reads, that's for sure. So this first book is The Awakening, and I read this one first, and I heard that these graphic novels have won tons of awards, like in the comic book graphic novel world. Because of that, I was like, I need to read these. Plus, Brittany the Bibliophile, one of my favorite booktubers, absolutely loves these, and so I thought for sure, like, okay, like, I'm gonna love them. Well, before you go into these, just know, these are not easy reads. These are super duper duper complex books. And I was reading this first book and I was like, oh my god, I am so confused. The world building in these graphic novels are insane. Like, they're trying to fit so much into one graphic novel that it can get really discombobulated and really confusing. Like, there were so many times where I'm like, wait, who is this character? Is this a like enemy? Are they on the same team? Like, how are these people related? How are these people connected? Like, there's all these different races and different species and different worlds and different lands. It kind of feels like the author like drops you into a second book of a series and you're trying to play catch up the entire time. I had to read this book super duper slowly because it was a lot to take in. And I'm like, am I like the only one that is really struggling here? So I actually went on Goodreads when I was done, and everybody said, this is so confusing. This is so complex. And a lot of people are like, I have no idea what I just read. Another person said you might want to read it once, and then once you're done, go back and reread it again, and it's going to be much easier to understand, which I should have done that, but I didn't because I was too lazy. But it's a lot, guys, so just a warning. I have to say that the artwork in these graphic novels is honestly what is keeping me reading them. I gave this first book 3 stars. But if it wasn't illustrated by this artist, I probably would have given it 2 stars, to be honest, because the artwork is that stunning. It reminds me a lot of like Audrey Kawasaki, and it has very similar like color palettes to Audrey Kawasaki, and that's why I'm so drawn to it. And if I didn't love the artwork as much as I do, I probably wouldn't continue with this series. So that says a lot about the art, but I can say that this second one was better. It was definitely less confusing. I kind of felt like we understood the world a little bit, so she kind of stuck with one storyline a little bit more. So this is a really important page of the novel, and it basically goes into all of the different species in this book, the different races. We've got the humans, the ancients, the cats, which are the Ubasti, which are basically like philosophers. We've got the old gods, and then we've got the Arcanics. And all of these characters are different races, and they all kind of have a different relationship with each other. So one thing that they do in these novels is they have these pages, and they use the Ubasti or the philosopher cats as info dumpers, and they will just do a ton of words on one page, and they just info dump you, and you have to just like follow it. And then I have to like read it again and then read it again just so I know that I'm like following the story, because a lot of times these pages will tell you like a full-blown story of something that's happened in the past, like a war, or why these 2 races are against each other, those types of things. And I'm just like, oh my god, so confusing. These are not like young adult stories. They're definitely more adult. They're really complex, and I almost feel like these would almost be better if they were in novel form, but they're so beautiful. And I'm definitely going to finish the series because I own all 4 books, so I'm definitely going to continue. Hopefully as time goes on it gets easier. I'll definitely let you guys know. So the next book I read was The Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green, and I got this from the library, and I've been wanting to read this book forever, but I just never got around to it. And I gave this book 5 stars. I loved this book so freaking much. I loved the concept of this book. Basically, it's about this girl who is just walking home from work one day and she comes across this big giant robot called a Carl, and she makes a YouTube video and she's interviewing this machine that she names Carl, and she posts it on YouTube, and all of a sudden that video gets millions of views and this girl becomes like YouTube and like social media famous, basically, as the person that discovered the Carls, and she becomes like the spokesperson for the Carls. And it's so interesting to see this anonymous girl that's kind of cynical become like this huge media star. It talks a lot about, you know, internet celebrity and internet fame and what that can do to somebody. Obviously, Hank Green is a YouTuber, and so he really knows a lot of the background to being YouTube famous and being internet famous, and so it really goes into some of the struggles that she has and the negative aspects that can happen to a person, and it was really well done. And I thought that aspect was so interesting, especially because I have been working on YouTube for 10 years and I loved seeing the things that she was willing to do to keep her celebrity, to keep her, you know, level of fame. She started feeding off of it, and it was such a cool, interesting story. And the Carls in and of itself was an interesting storyline. Like, I was so interested in that as well. This story was really, really good, you guys, and I highly recommend it, and I cannot wait to read the second book because how it ended was so good. Like, cliffhanger. I loved it, and I think you guys should read it if you haven't read it yet, because it was just a really, really fun kind of like sci-fi book that had a lot of really interesting topics. Like, the whole internet fame thing was such an interesting part of the book, while also having the Carls. It was like two really interesting aspects of the book, especially the fact that it was written by somebody that has a lot of internet fame. Like, it was super well done. It was kind of like a own voices type of story. So the next book that I picked up was The Poet X, and I actually listened to this audiobook because I heard the audiobook was really good, and this book was so good. I also gave this book 5 stars. So this book is basically about a young girl who has really old parents, and they are very strict, they are very religious, and they kind of have these really, really high expectations and standards for her. And she starts to question her religion, question her faith, and she starts to struggle with a lot of aspects of, you know, what her faith has taught her, and she's really struggling because she meets a guy that she really likes and she just wants to get to know him, but her parents are really strict and she has to start hiding things from them, and she ends up finding poetry, slam poetry, and she becomes like obsessed with slam poetry, and she grows this huge passion for it, and she wants to be a poet, but her mom isn't very supportive. And it's so well done, and the cool thing about this book is it's written in verse, and the audiobook is fantastic. If you're gonna read this, I highly recommend the audiobook because it is a book written in verse, and the narrator is the author, so she does a really good job at narrating it. It's a better experience, definitely, to listen to the audiobook, I think. It's one of those books where you just have to listen to the audiobook. It just works better with the story. But I thought it was great. 5 stars, and I highly recommend it. The next graphic novel that I read was this book called Parrot. I gave this book 2 stars. It's a book basically about a mom who loses her kid in like a divorce type of situation. She loses custody and she wants her son back, and then all of a sudden she has to watch her boss's pets. She becomes her boss's pet sitter, and she has like 100 parrots or exotic birds. So she has to watch these exotic birds. This is one of those stories that is attempting to be very profound, right? Like, it's trying to be really, really deep, but it falls really, really short. The entire time I'm like, I see what you're trying to do here, but it's just not working for me, you know? The ending was horrible. They were trying to make this really deep, meaningful ending using parrots and the exotic birds as like symbolism, and I couldn't get over the fact that it was the absolute worst decision this character could have made with these exotic parrots. It had nothing to do with the symbolism, it had nothing to do with the, like, you know, metaphor that the author was trying to create. I just couldn't get over the fact that what she did with these parrots was absolutely horrible, and it completely took away from the deeper meaning that the author was trying to portray. And I was just like, oh my god. I gave this book 2 stars because it was just so frustrating, and it just fell so short for me. The only reason why I did give it 1 star is because it was a mom-focused graphic novel, and I feel like that is super hard to find. Like, a graphic novel written for a mother it was very mom focused, and that's why I picked it up, is because I was like, oh my gosh, this is like about a mom and her struggles as, you know, in motherhood and things like that. And I would absolutely love to see more graphic novels written for mothers. Like, that would be awesome. So the very last book that I read this month was a book called The Speed of Falling Objects, which is a pretty recent release, and this book was so good. This book, when I heard somebody talk about the synopsis of this book, I was like, wow, that sounds so interesting. It sounds like such a unique read, and I am super duper curious about it. This book is about a young girl in high school who basically grew up without her dad. Her dad ended up becoming a famous survivalist, and he has his own survivalist TV show. And on this TV show, he takes celebrities out into the middle of nowhere, and they have to survive on this TV show, right? Well, this girl is afraid of everything, and she has a disability. She is blind in one eye, and it has caused her to be more afraid of everything. And she's dealing a lot with the fact that she grew up without her dad, right? And she really wants to build a relationship with her father. So one day her father calls and he's like, hey, do you want to be on my show? This would be a really great way for us to kind of, you know, grow a closer bond, get to know each other more, and spend some time together. And so she decides that she wants to go on this survival show with her dad. On this specific episode, he also wants to have this famous young male celebrity. So on the way to their destination, they are in a plane crash, and they crash into the Amazon, and they have to survive, really survive, in the Amazon rainforest. And this book sounded so unique, and the synopsis alone made me interested in it. I was like, oh my god, that sounds so fun and so unique, like something I've never read before. Like, I'm curious. And it was really good, you guys. This book was so action-packed. It had so much in it that kept you interested. It never got boring. The characters were so good. You had some really great characters that were unlikable, but then you also had some really good characters. So it created really interesting dynamics between the characters. There was so much growth within these characters and so much growth within the relationships. Like, some of the, you know, key aspects to some of these relationships in this story were grown so well, and I think that the author did such a good job at making you really hate certain characters but also sympathize with them. It was about acceptance of yourself and acceptance within yourself, as well as acceptance within relationships, and such a good story. I highly recommend it, you guys. It was fantastic. I really, really loved it. There was a romance in this novel, and I have to say, not my favorite romance of all time. I definitely didn't feel like a super strong connection to this romance. It's not necessarily that I wish that it didn't have it or that it didn't need it. It was just more so I didn't necessarily believe it. Like, I wasn't like rooting it on, or something about it felt a little convoluted to me. Like, I couldn't really grasp that really strong emotion between the two, and so it kind of made me just not really care that much about it. That was the only downside to the book, but other than that, I thought it was really good, and it was a really fun story with a lot of action and a lot of, you know, conflict and growth, and it was a good story, guys. I highly recommend it. And then last but certainly not least, The Female of the Species, which we read for the book club. This was the February book club pick. But as you guys saw, I didn't love this book, but I also didn't hate this book. There was qualities about it that I liked, and there was qualities about it that I didn't like. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Here's the thing that I'm starting to feel about young adult contemporaries. I, a lot of times, not always, but I a lot of times don't like young adult contemporaries that take place in a high school setting. It's just not my cup of tea. A lot of times I just don't relate to the setting, to the characters. I get a little bit annoyed sometimes by it. I love young adult that take place outside of the high school setting, like if you're doing like a sci-fi or a fantasy, a young adult fantasy is fine, as long as the characters are not in that high school real world setting. I find that I tend to get a little bit more annoyed with it, or I'm just not as into it, I guess I should say, and this definitely had that quality, but I did like a lot of aspects to it. I'm going to put the video link down below if you guys want to see my full thoughts on it, because I'm not going to go on about it in this video because you guys already saw it, but I gave this book 3 stars. Maybe I could give it 4, 3.5, I don't know, but on Goodreads I rated it 3. So that's kind of my thoughts on this. It was good, but I wouldn't say it was like this mind-blowing read. It kind of feels like one of those books that I'm going to forget about over the years, you know? It's like you read it, you liked it somewhat, but it's not going to be a book that really sticks with me and like I remember, you know, for years to come. So that is it, guys, for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys found some books you want to read. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will update you guys at the end of April, because I'm going to do like 2-month wrap-ups, I think, unless I read like a ton of books in 1 month. Then I might do a monthly. It kind of just depends on how much I read for the month. So I might do one at the end of March, but if not, it'll be at the end of April. Next month, I'm going to be reading the Sarah J. Maas new release, her adult fantasy novel called House of Earth and Blood. It's the Crescent City series. I'm so excited. It's gonna be so good. So if you guys want to join the book club and read that book, you can. Like I said, if you guys watched my book club video that I just put up about Female of the Species, I mentioned to you guys, like, if you don't want to read that book, I totally understand. The only reason I'm picking it for the book club is because it might be one of the only books I read in March, because I think it's going to be really, really good, and I have a feeling it might put me in a little bit of a reading slump because it is long, and I think it's very dense as well, and I don't know if I'm going to want to read a lot of other books next month if I read Crescent City, so we'll see. I don't know. So that is it, guys. I will talk to you soon. I hope you have a fabulous day, and I will talk to you guys in my next video. Bye! Thumbnails. So frustrating. Okay, let's see if I can do this. Not easy being a booktuber. It's a whole different game. Okay.